They were convinced their tanks were unbeatable. The type Jiushiwu Ha Jiangou had torn through Chinese infantry lines in the Yizhenjiubai Senshimelt, outmaneuvered Soviet light armor at Khalkhin Gol, and rumbled through the jungles of Malaya and the Philippines with ease in Yizhenjiubai Sishiyi. Japanese tank crews patted the Ha Jiangou's thin steel hull like it was a trusted comrade. C tons of speed and firepower they believed was perfectly tailored to the Pacific's islands and jungles. They'd never met an enemy they couldn't crush. They were wrong. The story of how they learned this bitter truth doesn't start with a defeat, but with a confidence built on years of fighting foes with no real answer to their armor. The Ha Jiangou wasn't a last-minute design. It was born from a problem the Imperial Japanese Army faced in Yizhenjiubai Senshisen. Their workhorse-type Bashijomi Idiom tank trundled along at just Shuwu Yunli Meisaoshi. Fine for walking alongside infantry, but useless for the fast, mechanized warfare the army wanted. Japanese planners had watched Germany and the Soviet Union build swifter armored forces, and they wanted a tank that could keep up with motorized infantry, moving Sisha Yunli Meisaoshi by truck, crawl through Manchuria's mud and China's rice paddies, and be made in numbers their factories could handle. In July, Yizhenjiubai Senshisen, the Army Technical Bureau laid out the rules. 7 tons, a Senshi Haomi gun, 每小时40公里 top speed, armor that could stop rifle and machine gunfire, and simple enough to build and fix. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries got the job, and engineer Tomi Ohara, who designed the type Bashijo, took charge. His biggest innovation was the bell crank suspension, a simple system of levers and springs that let the Ha Jiangou bounce over rough ground other tanks would get stuck on. By June, Yizhenjiubai Senshi, the first prototype was ready. Trials in Manchuria and Japan proved it was a winner. On paved roads, it hit Meisaoshi 45 gongli. Cross Jian country, it kept Arshiwu Fei Meisaoshi 30 gongli. Its turning radius was so tight, it could spin in place. Unheard of for a tracked vehicle its size. The air-cooled, Liu cylinder diesel engine, by 20 horsepower at Iten Babaidran Meifin was reliable, too. No gasoline to catch fire, and diesel was easier to find in Manchuria and Southeast Asia. It held 20 gallons of fuel, enough for by Yunli les on roads. There were flaws, of course. The suspension bounced so hard on rough ground that aiming while moving was impossible, and crews got exhausted fast. Engineers added braces to link the bogie wheels, calling it the Manchurian suspension. But the ride stayed bumpy. Still, when the type Jiushiwu was presented to the Army Technical Bureau in Yizhenjiubai Senshi, the debate was short. Infantry worried Shar Halmi of armor was too thin for assaulting fortifications. Cavalry argued speed and mobility were better protection. In the end, infantry caved. The type Jiushiwu Ha Jiangou, named for the Liangzhenwubai Jiushiwu th year of Japan's imperial calendar, only the last 2 digits used, was adopted. Production started at Mitsubishi in Yizhenjiubai Senshiliu. Up close, the Ha Jiangou was tiny, 60 feet long, 6 feet Zhou, inches wide, just under 10 feet tall. A man of average height could look over its turret. The armor was paper thin, Shar Haomi on the turret and upper hull, Zhou Haomi on the roof, Liu Haomi on the belly. Japanese designers thought that was enough. They were fighting Chinese forces with no anti-Jan tank guns and Soviet light tanks that couldn't punch through Shar Haomi easily inside. It was a sardine can. 3 crewmen, driver on the front left, peering through a tiny viewport and crude periscope, hull machine Jan gunner on the right, firing a Tzidansi Haomi type Jiushizi, and a commander stuck alone in the turret. That commander had the worst job in the EJ. He had to lead the tank, tell the driver where to go, and talk to other tanks. if his Ha-Jian-Go had a radio. Only E&C did. The rest used hand signals. He had to aim and fire the Senshi Haomi type Jiushi gun, load it standing up in the cramped turret, and fire a second Tidan Haomi machine gun mounted on the turret's rear. No seat, no turret basket, just a metal floor he stood on for hours. American tankers who later saw captured Ha-Jian-Gos couldn't believe anyone survived in there. "It's like fighting in a shoebox," one Sherman crewman said. But against the enemies it was built for, the Ha-Jian-Go worked. In Itenjobai Senshi, it roared into China. Senshi Haomi, high-gen explosive rounds, blew up bunkers, machine guns, cut down troops in open fields, and its speed let it chase retreating Chinese forces. Crews learned their trade here, where their tanks were kings. They started thinking the Ha-Jian-Go was a great tank, not just a good one for a specific fight. That delusion got tested at Khalkhin Gol in Itenjobai Senshi, when Japan clashed with the Soviet Union on the Mongolian border. Here, the Ha-Jian-Go faced real tanks, Soviet BT-Fu-US and BT-Fu-CS, with Sishiwu Haomi guns that could punch through Shar Haomi armor from Wulinin yards. The BTS had thicker armor too. Arsha Haomi on the turret. On July R, Itenjobai Senshi, Japan's Sen RD tank regiment, mostly Ha-Jian-Gos, attacked Soviet positions. They won at first, using surprise to destroy Senshara BTS and capture Senshiwu Futa vehicles. But Soviet counterattacks hit hard. Soviet guns picked off Ha-Jian-Gos from ranges where the Japanese Senshi Haomi couldn't reach. By the end, Japan had lost dozens of tanks. The lesson was clear. The Ha-Jian-Go couldn't fight modern tanks, but Japan's leaders ignored it. They focused on training crews better, not building better tanks. The Ha-Jian-Go still worked in China, after all. When the Pacific War started in December, Itenjobai Senshi, Ha-Jian-Gos proved useful again. They crawled through Malaya's rubber plantations. British commanders said tanks could never get through. Their unsupported landings in the Philippines. On December Ashar, Itenjobai Senshi, near De Mortis, Ha-Jian-Gos fought America's M-Sen Stuart light tanks, the first U.S. tank versus Japanese tank battle in the Pacific. Both had Senshi Haomi guns, but the Stuart had Senshara Haomi turret armor. Even so, the Ha-Jian-Gos won a small victory, destroying one Stuart in close jungle fighting. These wins made Japanese crews even more confident. The Ha-Jian-Go was doing exactly what it was supposed to do: fast, reliable, good at helping infantry. So when orders came to defend Saipan in Itenjobai Senshi, they loaded Ha-Jian-Gos onto ships without a second thought. Saipan was different. The island in the Marianas was just Itenjobai Wushiyungli Les from Tokyo. If America took it, B-4 Arshijo bombers could hit Japan's home islands. Japan fortified it with Senshur Lininin troops, twice what U.S. intel thought, and the Jo Tank Regiment, led by Colonel Takashi Goto. The regiment had Sishisu tanks, a mix of Ha-Jian-Gos and slightly bigger type, Joshitsi Chai, Jian-Ha medium tanks, Wushitsi Haomi guns, same thin armor. For the Pacific, that was a huge armored force, bigger than any America had faced there. The U.S. assault started on June Shuwu, Itenjobai Senshi. Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner sent landing craft ashore at Linwu Cr. By Limbas Siliun, the 1st Marines hit the beach, R&D and CTH divisions, under fire from Japanese artillery on the hills. By nightfall, Archer Lininin Americans were ashore, and MC Sherman medium tanks rumbled off LSTs to back them up. The Marines had a beachhead, but it was shaky. Japanese artillery still hit the beaches, and counterattacks came all night. On June Shalil, Marines dug in and pushed inland. General Holland Smith sent in the Arshid-CTH Infantry Division as reserves. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, Japan's commander on Saipan knew he had to strike fast. Before America brought more firepower ashore, he ordered a big counterattack. Yausen-Th infantry regiment troops would hit U positions around Kagman airfield, and Goto's tanks would charge southwest of Hill, Ebite Lilshasudandil, hitting the American transmitting station to throw them into chaos. It was a risky plan. Night attack, infantry and armor coordinating over rough ground, but Saito had no choice. Goto gathered his tank crews. They checked fuel tanks, tightened track links, loaded ammo, Senshitsuhaumi for Ha Jan Goz, Wushitsuhaumi for Chi Jan Haz, and tested radios. Only a quarter of the tanks had them. The crews were confident. Many had fought in China or Malaya. They trusted their Ha-Jan Gos. In the pre-Jan dawn dark of June Shitsi, the column moved out. Diesel engines rumbled, tracks clanked, and commanders stood in turrets, squinting through the dark to coordinate with hand signals. Inside each Ha-Jan Go, crews felt the familiar vibration. This was the part they knew. The Americans heard them coming. Marine sentries reported engine noise from the north. Officers yelled orders, men grabbed guns, anti-Jen tank crews pointed their Senshitsuhaumi M-Sen guns at the dark, and Sherman crews climbed into their tanks. At Lin-Sen-Sen-In, the attack began. 40 Jan 4 Japanese tanks advanced on the R&D Marine Division, some with infantry clinging to their hulls. Marines saw dark shapes emerging from the gloom, heard diesel engines roar, and watched tracks kick up dirt. Japanese commanders fired hull machine guns. Others held fire to get closer. Then something no one expected happened. Marine machine gunners in foxholes opened fire with Browning MR Wuxi Jan caliber heavy machine guns. Not the Senshur Jan caliber infantry guns. These were big, Char-Dien-Tsi-Haumi weapons built to shoot down planes and destroy light vehicles. The MR fired armor-Jen piercing rounds that could punch through Arshasen-Haumi of steel at Artinin Yards, Shujyo-Haumi at Wulinin Yards, tested and proven at U.S. arsenals. The Ha-Jan Go's maximum armor was Char-Haumi. Tracer rounds arced orange through the dark. The M-Liao Mouse boomed. Boom, Jan, boom, Jan, boom, sustained fire that shook the ground. Gunners aimed at the Ha-Jan Go's, half Jan expecting their bullets to bounce off. They didn't. The Wushu Jan Kao rounds punched clean through the Ha-Jan Go's thin steel. Some went in one side and out the other. Inside, crews froze. This wasn't like China, where bullets just clanged off the hull. These rounds were coming through. In the cramped turret, there was nowhere to hide. A round could hit the engine, the ammo rack, or a crewman. Private Joe Martinez, a Marine machine gunner near the airfield, watched his tracers hit a Ha-Jan Go head Jan on. He saw sparks inside the tank through its vision ports. The Ha-Jan Go slowed, then stopped. Smoke poured from its engine. 2 crewmen bailed out. Marines in foxholes shot them before they got yards. Another gunner, on a half-track Yalwulin Yards from a Ha-Jan Go, fired a long burst into its side. The tank turned toward him, exposing more hull. He kept firing. He saw the Ha-Jan Go's commander slump forward in the turret, then fall. Wuxi Jan Kao round through the turret armor, straight through the man. A third Marine manning a fixed, Wuxi Jan Kao on the line, aimed at a Ha-Jan Go's engine compartment. Lil Haumi armor there. His rounds penetrated, and the diesel engine seized. The crew ran back to Japanese lines, dodging rifle fire. Japanese crews couldn't process it. They'd trained for years, fought in China where enemy guns did nothing. Now American machine guns were killing them. Not anti-Jan tank guns, not artillery, not Sherman cannons, just infantry weapons. One captured Japanese tank officer told interrogators he thought America had a secret weapon. He couldn't believe a regular machine gun could destroy a tank. As the Ha-Jangos faltered, Sherman tanks moved in. The contrast was brutal. Ha-Jian-Go, Tidan Situns, Shar Halmi armor versus MCA Fei Sherman, Senshi Ba tons, Wushi Halmi frontal armor, angled to stop anti-Dan tank rounds. The Sherman's Tishu Halmi gun could kill a Ha-Jian-Go from over a mile away. When Shermans fired, Ha-Jangos blew up. Turrets flew off, ammo cooked off, hulls split open. One Ha-Jian-Go commander, his tank hit by Wushi-Jian-Kal fire, but turret still working, tried to fight back. He ordered his gunner to fire at a Sherman Yaolin yards away. The Senshi Halmi round hit the Sherman's turret. Clang, just a dent. The Sherman turned, aimed, and fired one Tishu Halmi round. The Ha-Jian-Go exploded. By mid-Jan morning the counterattack was over. 30 Jan 1 Japanese tanks lay destroyed. Marines counted them later. 1,000 Japanese soldiers were dead, including most tank crews. The Marines had won, but it was costly. The RND Marine Division's commander said if the attack had succeeded, his division would have been crippled. But when Marines walked among the destroyed Ha-Jian-Gos, they saw the truth. The tanks weren't fearsome. They were flimsy. One officer pointed to a Ha-Jian-Go's hull, clean round holes where Wushi-Jian-Kal rounds had gone through. You could fit a fist in some. Inside, the turret had a hand crank for traversing, no seats, and ammo piled loose on the floor. It was crude, cramped, and utterly vulnerable. Marines who'd fought at Guadalcanal 2 years earlier remembered Ha-Jian-Gos seeming scary then. No U.S. tanks, just light weapons. But now, with Wushi-Jian-Kals and Shermans, the Ha-Jian-Go looked like what it was. A Yiten Jobai Senshimas light tank, out of its depth. The psychological blow to surviving Japanese tank crews was crippling. Those who surrendered, their tanks disabled by Wushi-Jian-Kal fire or Sherman rounds, sat in POW camps grappling with a truth they couldn't outrun. Their Ha-Jian-Gos weren't just outmatched, they were obsolete. The machines they'd trusted with their lives offered less protection than a steel rain barrel against American firepower. Intelligence reports from interrogations painted a clear picture. Japanese tankers talked of shock. Shock at the sheer quantity of American weapons, the way ammo seemed endless, the fact that even support guns like the Wushi-Jian-Kal could destroy their armor. One veteran who'd fought in China since Iten-Jobai Senshi told interrogators he'd always believed Japan would win with spirit over steel. After Saipan, he said, "Spirit doesn't stop a bullet that goes through your tank." Another crewman, whose Ha-Jian-Go's turret had been pierced by a Wushi-Jian-Kal round that killed his commander, said he felt betrayed by his leaders. They'd promised the Ha-Jian-Go was enough. But it was nothing against American firepower. These reports traveled fast through U.S. command. The lesson was simple. Japanese tanks weren't a serious threat. A Wushi-Jian-Kal machine gun, standard issue on jeeps, half-tracks, even some rifles, could take out a Ha-Jian-Go at close range. Pair that with bazookas, Senshi Halmi anti-Jan tank guns, and Shermans and Marines had all the firepower they needed. Word spread through the ranks. You didn't need to call for air support or artillery when a Ha-Jian-Go showed up. Just grab the Wushi-Jian-Kal. That knowledge changed everything. On Guadalcanal, Marines had hidden from Ha-Jian-Gos, scared of their Senshi Halmi guns. On Saipan they stood and fought, because they knew the Ha-Jian-Go was a paper tiger. The fear of Japanese armor, which had haunted Pacific troops for years, vanished. The battle for Saipan dragged on for weeks after the failed tank attack. Marines and army troops fought through sugarcane fields, swamps, and volcanic cliffs, climbing Mount Tapochau, Iten Wubai Wushisi feet, under constant fire. Japanese soldiers hid in caves, fighting to the last man. The island was finally declared secure on July 9, 1946, but the cost was high, sentence by Americans dead, Yiwan Senten wounded. For Japan, it was a disaster. With Saipan in U.S. hands, Fu Archijos began bombing Tokyo in November 1946. Emperor Hirohito realized the war was turning. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo resigned on July Shaba. For the first time, Japanese media admitted defeat was possible. For Japanese tank crews across the Pacific, Saipan was a death knell. Word of the Ha-Jango's failure spread through military channels. Tank units on Tinian, Peleliu, and Okinawa knew their equipment was useless. But they had no choice. Japan's factories couldn't build better tanks. The war had strained its industrial capacity to the breaking point. American submarines sank merchant ships carrying iron ore and oil from Southeast Asia. Factories were bombed, workers were drafted. Tanks became a low priority. Japan focused on kamikaze planes and coastal artillery to defend the home islands. Engineers had designed better tanks, sure. The Type Senchi Jan Yu had a Chishuhaumi gun. The Type Sichi Jan 2 was heavier, with thicker armor. But these were pipe dreams. Only Yaoliuliu Chi Jan News were built. None saw combat outside Japan. The Chi Jan to never left the prototype stage. The Ha Jan Go, flawed as it was all Japan had to send to the islands. Meanwhile, American production was a juggernaut. The Detroit Tank Arsenal, built by Chrysler, made Joshichi Sherman tanks in December 1946 alone, more than Japan produced in an entire year. Fisher Tank Arsenal in Michigan cranked out Yuan Iten Shermans. Even locomotive factories, like American Locomotive in New York, switched to building tanks, Liaochen Senbai Shermans total, by war's end. U.S. factories had built 49,234 Shermans. Japan, just 2,300 Ha Jangos, all between 1936 and 1943. The Sherman wasn't perfect. It was outgunned by German Tigers. But in the Pacific, it was overkill. It weighed Sensha tons, had Wuxi Haomi frontal armor, angled to resist rounds, and a Chishu Haomi gun that could kill a Ha Jango from a mile away. It had a 5-man crew: commander, gunner, loader, driver, bow gunner, each with a clear job, unlike the Ha Jango's overworked 3-man team. Every Sherman had a radio, so crews could coordinate. Only ENCHA Goes had that luxury. The Sherman's tracks lasted 2,500 les, 5 times longer than the Ha Jango's. On Tinian, in July 1947, Ha Jangos tried to counterattack marine positions. All were destroyed, 4 by Wuxi Jankal fire, 3 by bazookas. On Peleliu that September, Japanese tank crews dug their Ha Jangos into caves, using them as stationary bunkers. They knew moving meant death. Even then, Marines flushed them out with flamethrowers or bazookas. On Eniwetok in February 1946, Colonel Takeo Nishi's Arshileo Th Tank Regiment buried Ha Jangos in volcanic ash, leaving only their turrets exposed. It didn't help. Wuxi Jankal rounds still penetrated the turret armor, and flamethrowers turned the tanks into ovens. Okinawa, the last major Pacific battle, was the Ha Jango's final humiliation. Japan's Arshichi Th Tank Regiment had Shisen Ha Jangos, and Shisi Chi Jan has Arshichi tanks total. The U.S. landed with Badinin tanks. On May 15, 1945, Japanese tanks supported an infantry counterattack. It was a massacre. Most Ha Jangos were destroyed within hours. Some hit by Shermans, others by bazookas, one even by a Marine throwing a thermite grenade into its engine compartment. The few survivors fled, leaving behind charred hulls. In August 1945, when the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria, Jan Goss faced another nightmare. Soviet T-237. The T-237 D-sloped armor and a T-56 gun that tore through Jan Goss like tissue paper. In the Battle of Shumshu Island, Kuril Islands, Jan Goss fought Soviet amphibious forces. 20 Gen 1 were destroyed in 2 hours. Soviet crews, veterans of the Eastern Front, didn't even break a sweat. For Japanese tank crews, the war's final years were a slow, bitter realization. They were fighting with relics. The Hajan Go, once a symbol of Japanese armored might, was now a death trap. Crews learned to dread every mission, knowing a Wushi and Cal round or a Sherman shell could end them at any moment. For Marines, the lessons were simpler. They learned that industrial power wins wars, that having more, better equipment matters more than fighting spirit. They learned that the factories back home, Detroit's assembly lines, Pittsburgh's steel mills, were as important as the men on the front, and they learned a tactical trick they'd use for the rest of the war. When you see a Hajan Go, aim the Wushi Jan Cal at its engine or side. It'll go down. There was no glory in it. Marines didn't cheer when a Hajan Go burned. They felt relief. Relief they didn't have to face a real tank threat like their buddies in Europe did with Tigers. They felt pity for the Japanese crews sent to die in a tank that couldn't protect them. And they felt grim satisfaction. Satisfaction that their weapons worked, that America's industry had their backs. After the war, some Hajan Gos were shipped to the U.S. for testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. American engineers took them apart, measured every piece of armor, Shar-Halmi front hull, Jo-Halmi roof, Lil-Halmi belly, and tested the steel. They found the armor was face-jan hardened, good for stopping rifle bullets, useless against Wushi Jan Cals or Chishu-Halmi rounds. They photographed the cramped interior, the commander's station with no seat, the hand-jan cranked turret, the ammo piled loose on the floor. American tankers who saw the Hajan Gos couldn't believe anyone fought in them. A Sherman crewman said, "We had it easy compared to those guys. Our tank was a home next to this." The engineer's report summed it up. The Hajan Go was a colonial warfare tank, good for fighting poorly armed foes, useless against a modern military. Any weapon stronger than a rifle could destroy it. The Wushi Jan Cal didn't just penetrate, it overpowered the armor, leaving exit holes bigger than the entry points. The one-Jan man turret was a fatal flaw. No commander could handle aiming, loading, and leading at the same time. The lack of radios made coordination impossible in combat. Every flaw, the report noted, came from Japan's constraints, limited factories, scarce resources, and a design philosophy stuck in the Iten-Jōbai-Senshimout. The Hajan Go was built for the war Japan wanted, invading China, bullying weak foes. Not the war it got, fighting a superpower with endless industrial might. Compare that to the Sherman. Where the Hajan Go had Wushi cubic feet of fighting space, the Sherman had Yaowulin, where the Hajan Go's commander stood. The Sherman's commander had a cupola with Senyolin Jan degree vision. Where the Hajan Go's gun had no stabilization, the Sherman's Chishu-Halmi could fire accurately while moving. Where the Hajan Go stored ammo loose, the Sherman had protected racks. Every part of the Sherman was built for modern war. Every part of the Hajan Go was built for a war that no longer existed. The real gap, though, wasn't in the tanks. It was in the systems that built them. America had factories that ran Tiefenger RCC, staffed by men and women, the Rosie the riveters, who welded armor and assembled engines. It had supply chains that moved raw materials from mines to factories to ports, then shipped Shermans across the Pacific. It had maintenance teams that fixed broken tanks in days, using parts scavenged from wrecked ones. Japan had none of that. Its factories were small, its supply lines were broken by US submarines, and its workers were scarce. The nation that had dared to fight the world's biggest industrial power had finally learned the cost. You can't win a modern war with Itzenjobai Senshimao tanks and a prayer. For the Japanese tank crews who climbed into Hajan-Gos on Saipan that June morning in Itzenjobai Sisha, the truth came too late. They thought they were going into battle with a weapon that could win. By sunset, those who survived knew they'd been sent to die in a machine that couldn't even keep them safe from a machine gun. The Hajan-Gos legacy isn't one of glory, it's a lesson. In war, equipment has to match the fight. A tank built for colonial raids can't stand against a superpower's army. Spirit can't stop a Wuxi Jiankao round, and no amount of courage can make up for a nation's inability to build the tools its soldiers need to survive. Today, a few Hajan-Gos still exist, in museums, rusting on Pacific islands, or in private collections. They're not celebrated like German Tigers or American Shermans. They're reminders of a war Japan couldn't win, of a tank that was never good enough. But for the Marines who fought them, and the Japanese crews who died in them, the Hajan-Go is more than a relic. It's a symbol of a moment in history when steel and industrial might proved stronger than pride. The Hajan-Go's decline didn't end with the war. It became a quiet metaphor for Japan's broader defeat, a physical reminder of how mismatched the nation was against Allied industrial power. For the US military, the captured Hajan-Gos weren't just trophies, they were textbooks. Engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground spent months dissecting them. Not to copy their design, but to understand how Japan's flawed priorities had led to such a vulnerable machine. They measured the bell crank suspension, effective for rough terrain, but fragile under stress. Tested the diesel engine, reliable but underpowered for even the Hajan-Gos, lightweight, and analyzed the armor, faced and hardened but too thin to stop anything beyond small arms. Their findings weren't just technical, they were strategic. The Hajan-Go, they concluded, was a product of a military that valued speed and cost over survivability. A choice that worked against weak foes, but crumbled against a peer adversary. This analysis shaped U.S. tank design for decades. Post-war American tanks, from the M. Sishiba Patton to the M.E. Abrams, prioritized three things the Hajan-Go lacked: thick, sloped armor, powerful, stabilized guns, and crew comfort to reduce fatigue in long battles. The one Janman turret, which had doomed Hajan-Go commanders to overload, became a relic. Tanks adopted 3 Janman turrets, commander, gunner, loader, to split tasks and improve efficiency. Radios, once a luxury in Japanese tanks, became standard in every American armored vehicle, ensuring crews could coordinate even in smoke or darkness. The lessons of Saipan, where Wuxi Jiankaos had turned Hajan-Gos into scrap, were baked into every design. Armor had to withstand more than just rifle fire. It had to survive heavy machine guns and anti-Jan tank weapons. For Japanese veterans who'd crewed Hajan-Gos, the war's end brought a mix of guilt and relief. Many returned home to a nation in ruins, reluctant to talk about their service, especially not about the tanks that had failed them. One veteran, Takeshi Yamada, who'd survived the Saipan counterattack, his Hajan-Go was disabled by Wuxi Jian fire, but he escaped before it exploded, told his son decades later that he still heard the sound of bullets through steel in his dreams. "We thought we were brave," he said, "but we were just lucky to die later, not sooner." Another veteran, Hideki Tanaka, who'd fought in China and the Philippines, refused to visit war museums. He couldn't bear to see a Hajan-Go, he said, because it reminded him of all the boys who didn't come back, killed in a tank that couldn't protect them. The Ha-Jian-Go's presence in museums today is often understated. At the Yushukan War Memorial in Tokyo, a Ha-Jian-Go sits in a corner, labeled simply Type Joshuwu Light Tank, used in China and the Pacific. No mention of Saipan, no note of its vulnerability to Wuxi Jian-Cals, just a quiet display of a machine that once symbolized Japanese might. In the U.S., the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Virginia has a Ha-Jian-Go captured on Saipan, its hull pockmarked with Wuxi Jian sail holes. The plaque nearby explains its flaws but doesn't dwell on the human cost. Just the tactical lesson. Lightly armored vehicles are ineffective against modern firepower. For most visitors, it's just another old tank, but for the families of Marines who fought at Saipan, or Japanese crewmen who died there, it's a marker of lives lost to a mismatch of equipment and ambition. The industrial gap that doomed the Ha-Jian-Go only grew wider in the war's final months. By Itenjobai Sishiwu, Japan was producing just Shi tanks a month, mostly Ha-Jian-Gos and Chi-Jian-Has, while the U.S. was building Iten Shermans a month. Japan's fuel shortages were so severe that some Ha-Jian-Go crews trained on wooden mock Jian UPS, never firing a real gun or driving a functional tank. When the war ended in August Itenjobai Sishiwu, hundreds of Ha-Jian-Gos were abandoned on Pacific Islands, their fuel tanks empty, their engines seized. Troops blew up most of them to prevent their reuse, but a few were left to rust, silent witnesses to Japan's failed armored campaign. One such Ha-Jian-Go sits on Guadalcanal today, half Jian buried in jungle mud, its turret pointing toward the sea. Local villagers call it the Iron Ghost, and tourists sometimes leave flowers there, not for the tank, but for the men who died in it. It's a fitting resting place, a machine built for conquest, now a monument to futility. The Wuxi Jian-Cal holes in its hull are still visible, a reminder of the day the Ha-Jian-Go's invincibility myth died. For military historians, the Ha-Jian-Go is a case study in design myopia, when a nation builds weapons for the war it wants, not the war it gets. Japan's leaders had assumed they'd keep fighting weak foes like China, so they built a tank for that fight. They ignored the lessons of Khalkhin Gol, where Soviet tanks outclassed the Ha-Jian-Go, and the early Pacific battles, where U.S. Stuarts, though not perfect, were more protected. By the time Saipan came, it was too late to redesign the Ha-Jian-Go or build a better tank. Japan's industry was collapsing, and its resources were gone. The Ha-Jian-Go also highlights a broader truth about war. Equipment matters, but so does the industrial system behind it. The U.S. didn't just build better tanks than Japan. It built a system that could produce those tanks in bulk, ship them across oceans, and repair them in the field. Japan's system, by contrast, was fragile. It relied on captured resources, like oil from the Dutch East Indies, small factories that couldn't scale up, and a workforce decimated by conscription. The Ha-Jian-Go was a product of that fragility, cheap to build, easy to maintain, but unable to stand against a military with endless resources. For the Marines who fought the Ha-Jian-Go, the memory of Saipan stayed with them long after the war. Private Joe Martinez, the Wuxi Jian-Cal gunner who destroyed a Ha-Jian-Go near Kagman Airfield, went on to fight at Okinawa. He kept a piece of the Ha-Jian-Go's armor, pierced by his bullets, as a souvenir, not out of pride, but as a reminder of how lucky I was to have a weapon that worked. He told his grandchildren, "War isn't about being brave, it's about having the right tools to come home." Another Marine, Lieutenant John Kelly, who'd commanded a Sherman platoon at Saipan, wrote in his memoirs that the Ha-Jian-Go's failure was a lesson in humility for all of us. We didn't win because we were better soldiers. We won because we had better tanks, better guns, and more ammo. The Japanese fought hard, but they fought with one hand tied behind their backs. Today, the Ha-Jan-Go is mostly forgotten by the general public, overshadowed by more famous tanks like the German Tiger or the American Sherman. But for those who study World War II's Pacific theater, it's a crucial part of the story. It's a reminder that even the most perfect weapon for one fight can become a death trap in another. It's a symbol of Japan's overreach, its attempt to conquer an empire with a military built for colonial wars, and it's a testament to the power of industrial might. How a nation that can build more, better weapons can turn the tide of a war, even against a determined enemy. The final irony of the Ha-Jan-Go is that it was, in its own way, a success for the war Japan planned to fight. Against China's poorly armed forces, it was fast, lethal, and reliable. It helped Japan conquer Manchuria, parts of China, and Southeast Asia. But wars don't stay static. The entry into the Pacific changed everything, turning a colonial conflict into a global industrial war, one Japan could never win. The Ha-Jan-Go, designed for the Yitsen-Jobei-Senshimao, couldn't adapt to the Yitsen-Jobei-Sishimao. It was a victim of its own early success. A machine that had once been an asset, but became a liability when the enemy got stronger. In the end, the Ha-Jan-Go's story isn't just about a tank, it's about a nation's failed gamble. Japan bet that speed, spirit, and early victories would be enough to win the Pacific War. But the Ha-Jan-Go's defeat at Saipan proved otherwise. On that June morning in Yitsen-Jobei-Sishimao, when Wuxi-Den Kol-Roun's first punched through Ha-Jan-Go armor, Japan's dream of an empire died a little. The tanks that had once symbolized its power became symbols of its weakness, and the crews who'd trusted those tanks learned the hardest lesson of war. No amount of courage can make up for a weapon that's outmatched. The Ha-Jan-Go is gone now, for the most part, rusted, buried, or locked in museums. But its legacy lives on in the lessons it taught. Design weapons for the war you might face, not just the one you want. Prioritize crew survival over speed or cost, and never underestimate the power of industrial might. For the men who fought in and against Ha-Jan-Gos, those lessons were paid for in blood. For the rest of us, they're a reminder of how quickly victory can turn to defeat when a nation's military priorities don't match its strategic ambitions.